The incredible tale of the kobolds and the king was only half of the story. Following the feats of Badhran Patens, the city was engulfed in celebration. He had achieved what dozens of men before him had failed to do, and he did it alone. The common folk spoke his name with reverence and amazement. The children emulated him, waving their wooden swords to and fro as they pretended to slay the ferocious kobold king. The following day, Badhran Patens strode through the city gates dressed as a commoner. He wore no adornments. He brandished neither a weapon nor any instrument. Weaving his way through the crowd, he made his way to the king's court, speaking not a word. When Badhran Patens finally addressed the king, his words reverberated with an eloquence and a rhythm that would suggest he was of high blood. The specifics of the conversation between the bard and the young king will never be known. What we can assume is that Gandriel attempted to sound as appreciative as possible when he told Badhran Patens that he was unable to honor the terms of their agreement. According to his court counselors, half of the coffer's contents was an exorbitant amount to pay any one man, and winter was coming after all. Gandriel, expecting an extreme reaction to this news, had prepared for the worst. The walls of his royal court chamber were lined with soldiers in full-plate armor. Having surveyed the room, Badhran Patens gave no quarrel. He fixed his eyes on the young King Gandriel and bowed, adhering strictly to proper customs. As Gandriel returned the look, giving the hero a tacit bow of his own, he spied a small glint of light in the eye of Badhran Patens, like that of a bright yet fading star burning out in the heavens. And with that fading sparkle, Badhran Patens was gone. For nearly a generation's time, following the ridding of the kobolds from Gandriel's land, the people prospered greatly. Gandriel grew to be loved, and his fiefdom expanded. The mines to the north, inaccessible in the time of the kobolds, were now rich and flowing with ore. The fields upon the valley were lush and lavish with crops, and the mountainside, once scarce of fauna of any kind, was now inhabited by no less than a dozen native species. Gandriel, much like his land, had also prospered. His keep was the center of trade for half of the continent. Merchants, artisans, and craftsmen came from all walks of life to flourish under his rule. He commanded an army of over 1,000 men strong, able to maintain law and order as far as the eye could see. In his 35th year, Gandriel had taken a queen, and although she was not born of royal blood per se, Metamarit was considered the most beautiful woman in the land. She hailed from Theradren, the land between the mountains and the vast sea. Her people, seafarers by nature, lived primarily in tightly knit clans. Her father, Jarl Hyadal, being a shrewd politician, offered King Gandriel his daughter's hand, thus solidifying their alliance. After 4 years of marriage, Metamarit gave birth to a daughter, Princess Lilandra. Lilandra grew to be beautiful, like her mother. She lived a sheltered but fortunate life. Soon after her 16th birthday, Gandriel announced that Lilandra was betrothed to Prince Hartung, son of King Bathmas of Denor. Unifying these two kingdoms would bring the entire continent under Gandriel's realm. The wedding was scheduled for the following spring, and envoys were sent to all 4 continents announcing the event. In the days leading up to the wedding, guests arrived in droves. Ambassadors of goodwill came from the furthest reaches of all 4 continents. They arrived bearing gifts of both wealth and spectacle. There were gifts of gold, the rarest of jewels, weapons of cold dark steel, as well as elven bows of the highest quality. Some traveled with massive beasts of burden as well as giant birds of prey. there were large caravans of minstrel troops, all vying for the opportunity to perform at such an auspicious event. A Namirian falcon was brought from the mountains of Lycos, a creature of enormous power, the height of an average man, with a wingspan of over 25 feet, its talons capable of crushing the shell of a giant terrapin. On the day of the wedding, in a show of power, Gandriel lined the pathway to the Great Hall with only his best paladins and warriors, wearing full plate armor for all to see. The inside of the Great Hall was just as spectacular. The massive chandelier hung from the 30-foot-high domed roof. Around the inner circumference of the dome were windows of colored stained glass, each depicting a scene from an ancient battle. The dwarven marble floor shone with a mirrored finish. Each table was handcrafted by only the most exceptional woodworkers, made explicitly for the event from elven hardwoods, and adorned with carved figures of dragons, manticores, and other rare beasts. The majestic Nymerian falcon, its cage large enough to accommodate 3 men, was placed in the corner beside the royal table for all to see. The outer walls of the room were lined with chests filled with coins, jewels, and even rare ore. Some had spices or antiquities said to have magical properties, all brought from the farthest corners of the world. As the servants finished bringing out the last of the roasted mutton and mead, the leader of one of the minstrel troops came forward to address the king. He explained that they did not have a lavish gift, but they did have an unusually talented cittern player who wrote a beautiful melody specifically for this event. Gandriel gave the troop leader a nod, with a somewhat irritated wave of his hand, cueing them to begin. The troop leader snapped his fingers twice and clapped his hands quickly, waving for the cittern player. The first thing Gandriel noticed was his size. He was small for a human man, barely taller than a dwarf. The cittern player sat on a small wooden chair beside the royal table. Moments later, 2 minstrels scurried in carrying what had to be the largest instrument anyone had ever seen. The neck of the cittern alone was a full foot taller than the lowly cittern player, and it appeared to have at least a dozen strings. When he began to play, the sound was barely audible above the noise of the conversation filling the great hall. But with every note, the song gained amplitude, until it filled the room with such a sweet melody that the entire wedding party stopped what they were doing to listen. Within seconds, guests began standing, then dancing, at first slowly, then faster and faster to stay with the tempo of the song. What happened next haunted King Gandriel for the rest of his life. In an attempt to quell this strange behavior, Gandriel began shouting orders, but his voice could not be heard above the sound produced from the massive cittern. The song increased in tempo and pitch, and the guests began reacting as people possessed. Some began disrobing, ripping the clothes from their bodies in violent spasms. Others rapaciously clawed clumps of meat from the roast mutton, forcing it into their mouths or the mouths of another. A noble woman was astride of one of the servants, gyrating like a wild animal. Gandriel was now both infuriated and amazed at the spectacle. "What sorcery is this?" he thought. He called for his guards, but the 2 paladins guarding the door had stripped off their plate armor and were dancing arm in arm like schoolchildren. There were people in the corners crying hysterically and others laughing uncontrollably like fools. Gandriel tried to rise from his chair, but he could not. He attempted to scream above the din, but his words made no sound. It was as if he were trapped in a dream from which he could not wake. He turned to look at the cittern player, whose hand was sliding up and down the neck of the instrument with such speed it was but a blur. The fingers on his right hand plucking the strings with such dexterity they mimicked the legs of a crystalline spider weaving its web. Princess Lilandra and Prince Hartung kicked over their chairs and began skipping around the royal table, grasping at the air as if trying to catch fairies. The song, now so loud that the sound echoed in waves, culminated in a mighty crescendo, shattering the stained glass on top of the dome, sending a shower of blue, green, and red glass down onto the cobblestones below. The queen, reacting to the mighty crash, rose and released the Nymerian falcon from its cage. The ferocious bird of prey swooped low and fast, snatched the roasted boar, spit and all, and exited the great hall from the now partially open roof. No longer able to bear witness to this debauchery of such epic proportion, Gandriel fixed his eyes on the cittern player. The face of the cittern player now began to change. It was the stable boy who his daughter was so fond of. Then the royal guard who was rumored to have run off with one of the king's mistresses. Then the falconer who his wife so admired. One by one, the faces changed like the shuffling of a deck of cards, and Gandriel recognized them all. Gandriel, agape with shock yet unable to move, watched as the lowly cittern player appeared to mouth a word. As he parted his lips, golden runes, elven in origin, floated through the air and in the direction of Gandriel, like tiny ships upon the sea. When the runes reached him, he heard the word above the noise and confusion, with the volume of a whisper, as if spoken for only the king to hear. Fermata echoed in his ear, and with that, time itself paused. The cittern player's face, no longer a blur, finally revealed his true identity. Badhran Patens, the king whispered in return. Badhran Patens' near shoulder-length golden locks waved like winter wheat bending in the breeze. His emerald green eyes shone bright as if backlit by fireflies. The bard stared back at the king, his smile changing from a crooked wry grin to beaming from ear to ear. Gandriel noticed a glint of light, just a sparkle in the eyes of Badhran Patens, like that of a bright yet fading star burning out in the heavens. And with that fading sparkle, everything faded to black. The midday sun shone through the openings that were once stained glass windows, waking the king like a warm kiss upon his cheek. The first thing Gandriel noticed was the smell. The hall reeked of spilled wine, vomit, and fornication. As he opened his eyes, shaking his head to clear the fog, he saw the half-naked bodies of his fellow nobles strewn about the floor, most of them still fast asleep. His queen lay naked, sleeping in the cage of the Nymerian falcon. Gandriel then reached desperately for a nearby tablecloth, realizing he was completely naked, save for the fool's cap upon his head. What he did not see was a single coin, bauble, or trinket. Badhran Patens had taken it all. In the years since the wedding, keepers of law have tried to get an accurate account of the events that night, to no avail. No two recollections were the same. Some claim to have been visited by dwarves, elves, or various different frightful creatures. Some said they dreamt they were children again, or visited by relatives long since passed. There was one thing, however, they all did agree upon. You must always pay the bard.